Hello and welcome to this video on how to build a questionnaire in Gorilla. This is a full guide, so it's fairly comprehensive, and I'll take you through from building a questionnaire from scratch all the way up to setting your recruitment policies and recruitment targets. I'll also discuss things like attention checks, how you could clone previous questionnaires or tasks, and also how you can import templates. We'll also talk about the automatic scorer, which can save you time in data processing. And finally, in the experiment, we'll be able to discuss how you might be able to stream out or screen out participants depending on how they've performed in your questionnaire. Okay, so let's get started. So the topic of our research today is going to be, can you judge eyewitnesses? So we're going to ask our participants some questions on what they think about eyewitness testimonies. Now, this is a very forensic psychology-based type question, and that is not a field that I'm an expert in, but I do work with a lot of forensic psychologist students, and I thought that this would be a good sort of broad example of how we could use Gorilla to collect lots of different types of information. We're going to start off by building several different questionnaires rather than compiling it all together in one big questionnaire. The reason for this is that it makes it a lot more easy for you to debug or find problems within individual questionnaires rather than having to sift through several pages or tens of pages to find where the particular problem is. It also allows us a lot more flexibility when it comes to putting our experiments together. And we're actually able to integrate some really cool stuff like branching in order to control the flow or the movement of our participant through our experiment. You can't really do this if it's all in one big questionnaire. So the first questionnaire that we're going to build is going to be the participant information sheet, the consent form, and the demographics. And chances are, if you've used Gorilla before to build a study for an assignment or another research project, that type of thing, you'd likely already have these components built. And I'll show you how you're able to use the cloning tool when it comes to making the debrief sheet at the end to just copy what you've already made and edit that within your new project. So this will save you a lot of time. I'll also discuss how you can import things like templates that your institution might provide you. Again, that's just another quick way of saving some time. Then we're going to build a standardized questionnaire called the Actively Open-Minded Thinking Questionnaire, or SCALE. And this scale comes with a set of instructions on how we calculate a total score, including things like reverse coding. So we're going to use the automatic scorer to do this for us within Gorilla's questionnaire builder. And this will save us a lot of time in data processing because rather than us having to calculate everybody's scores individually at the end, it will already be there in our data. So it will save you a lot of time. The third questionnaire that we're going to build is going to include an attention check question, and we'll discuss about their application and why we might need them within the video. But just to give you a quick oversight, online research is very useful at collecting lots of data, but sometimes our participants aren't actually being that genuine, and they'll just fly through a study to either get their reimbursement or their compensation for their time, such as RPS tokens or even money if that's what you're offering them. So we might want to chuck in a couple of specific questions, and I also add a few to the actively open-minded thinking scale to show how we might be able to use attention checks within our studies to be sure that we're getting genuine responses from our participants. Questionnaire 4 is going to be a series of witness statements. These are just going to be some vignettes that describe what a witness has seen, and then we ask our participants to make judgments based on what they've read. So things like their confidence, the reliability, whether or not they would trust them, that kind of thing. And then to show how we might be able to adapt a tool that's predominantly been built for quantitative research, I've added a couple of qualitative questions. So I can show you here how you might use Gorilla in a qualitative context rather than just quantitative. The last questionnaire, questionnaire 6, is going to be the feedback and debrief sheet. And this is where I'm going to demonstrate how you might be able to pull information like our actively open-minded thinking scale total score and present it on the feedback page for our participants to see. This isn't necessarily something that I would ordinarily do in research. I just wanted to demonstrate how you might achieve this if it's something that is needed. It's also very useful because you can start to see how you might be able to use particular data, how we can control branching, that kind of thing within a study. The debrief sheet, again, is just another standard document that you've probably built before, so you can use the cloning or import template there as well, and I'll discuss that at the beginning and the end of the video. And then finally, what we're going to do is wrap it all together as an experiment. I'll show you how to set up some branching nodes so you can control participants that fail the attention checks and reject them, and also then set up your recruitment, so your recruitment policies and your recruitment target. Log into Gorilla and create a new project. Call it something sensible, adding your name to the end so it's easy for your supervisor to find it. Click the questionnaire builder and give your questionnaire a name. I recommend giving it a proper name. This means that it's easy for you to identify and know its contents, for example, participant information sheet. This is not only good practice, it's also a really useful way of being able to identify the contents of each individual questionnaire when you're building your experiment or debugging issues. You can also rename your questionnaire whenever you want by clicking on the pen icon in the top left in the questionnaire builder. We are going to start by building the participant information sheet. To start building, click on page 1, click Add Object and select Text. Rename the text object and click in the text area. I've mentioned this before, but Gorilla uses Markdown in its text. If you're not sure what Markdown is, you can click the little eye icon on the right-hand side, then click on the Markdown formatted text link and you'll see some guidance on how to use Markdown. You can also use HTML to style text, which I'll use later on. Back on your questionnaire, click on the text object and delete the default text. Now start to fill in your participant information sheet using Markdown to style it. Please follow your institution's guidelines as to the content of the participant information sheet, and you should only ever use ethically approved text in real studies. I often get asked how to create new lines in text on Gorilla, and the simplest way of doing this is by using the BR element from HTML. This is essentially the less than symbol followed by the letters B and then R, and closed with the greater than symbol. This forces the text reader to insert a line break at the point of the BR element, which means that any following text will be on the line below. Another common style question I get is how to make text bold. You can do this by adding a double asterisk at the start and end of the text that you want to make bold. You can use the hashtag key to create headers. The number of hashes that you use relates to the size of the header, so the larger the number, the smaller the header. You might find it easier to create and edit your text if you break it down into chunks, and you can do this by adding multiple text components. It's also worthwhile finding out whether there are any templates available by your institution or your supervisor. You can import templates by clicking on the More Actions button and select Imports. Then find the zip file that you've been given and import that. This is best done at the start because importing will replace any content in the questionnaire that you've been building. Here, I'm importing my participant information sheet and consent form template. If you need to remove a page from your template, you can just click on the vertical ellipsis, the 3 dots on top of each other, to the right-hand side of the page, and click Remove. Next, I'm going to show you how to use the Gorilla consent form. Click on New Page, and then click Add Object, click on Consent Form, and click Create. You can edit the consent form in the Objects menu on the right-hand side by changing the responses and labels in the Questions and Statements rows section. Okay, that's the consent form done, so now we're going to work on our demographics questions. Click back to Pages and click New Page. I like to give my demographics page a title. You can do this by clicking on Add Object and select the text component. In the text box, you can use Markdown to create a header, which will work as your title. Next, I'm going to add my age question, so click Add Object, select Number Entry, change the object name to Age, and set your question text. Next, we're going to create our gender question. In this example, I used a comment box question, but you could also use text entry. Change the object name and set your question text. Next, we're going to create a biological sex question using the multiple choice objects. Change the object name and set your question text. In the Options section of the Object menu, change your responses. You can add more options by clicking the Add button below. Okay, the last question for this demographics questionnaire is our unique ID question. Many institutions use platforms like SONA Systems to recruit participants for research, and this question is a common one that is needed to record participants' unique IDs. Here I'm using a number entry question just like we did with the age, because I know my students' unique IDs are numerical and do not exceed 4 digits. So here I've set a maximum limit of 9999. Don't forget to name the object. This is a good habit to get into, again for debugging purposes. By default, Gorilla makes all questions required, forcing your participants to respond before continuing in your study. However, it's common that we make questions optional so that participants don't have to reply to questions that they don't want to answer. To do this, you need to click on the Show Additional Settings drop-down menu at the bottom of the Object menu and toggle Optional on. For your gender question, there's also another useful setting called Randomized Order. This changes the order of response options within that question. This can be particularly useful if you want to prevent response bias. It's only available to a couple of question types where it's suitable, like the multiple choice question. This isn't really necessary in a demographics question, but I wanted to demonstrate how it works in case you needed it in one of your own studies. Okay, that's our first questionnaire made. Many students attempt at this point just to continue adding more and more pages with different questionnaires. However, I strongly advise against this as it can become quite difficult to manage one large questionnaire. But it will also limit you on what you can do in the experiment, such as screening out participants during the study if they're not responding correctly or they're not suitable to participate. I'll demonstrate this later on. On to our next questionnaire. So back on the project screen, click Create New under Tasks and Questionnaires. Here we're going to create the Actively Open-Minded Thinking Scale. This will be a single-page questionnaire using the rating scale question type. Click on page 1, click on Add Object, and select the rating scale question. Click Create, and now set your question text. Now change the response text in the Options section of the Object menu. In this example, I'm using the range from Disagree Strongly all the way up to Agree Strongly on a 6-point Likert scale. It is possible to create a template rating scale object like I'm doing here, and then duplicating it, changing the question text so you have one rating scale object for each item in your scale. However, as you can see, this can get a little bit confusing and result in misordered questions. Instead, I would recommend creating a single rating scale object and then using the Add Multiple Questions and Items toggle to be able to add more items to your rating scale. Add one item for each question from your scale, and you can copy and paste the text into the text boxes. I find this approach cleaner and easier to handle than creating individual rating scales for each question, and it's typically a lot faster as well. One thing I like to do is if your questions have question numbers at the beginning, remove them. This could be seen as personal preference, as it's not really necessary in this particular instance, but it can be useful to do it, especially if you're creating a study where you're not presenting certain questions to participants based on previous responses. Usually, participants get a little confused and suspect if the number system is jumping about a bit. So items like 1, then 3, then 12. In this example, I'm also removing the letter R that's contained within brackets at the end of some of the questions. This is just an indicator from the original document I took the questions from that those questions are reverse scored. And again, we don't want to include them for participants because it may confuse them or give them an idea on how to respond. Next, we're going to set up the automatic scorer. This is a particularly useful tool in Gorilla that allows you to build a scoring system that will create an overall score for you at the end. You can also create subscale scores and reverse score things automatically within the platform. This will save you a lot of time when it comes to data processing. So click on the scoring tool on the left-hand side, click New Score, and give it a suitable name. For this questionnaire, I'm going to use each item from the scale, and to do this, I'm going to click on Include for page 1, then click on the main question text for the rating scale, which is the instruction to explain to participants what they need to do. And because some of the questions are reverse coded, I'm going to select Scoring Mode of Individual. I'm then going to toggle each individual item, changing the scoring from default to reverse where appropriate. If you want to change the scorer's name, you can do this by clicking the drop-down arrow next to the score's name and click Rename Score. Enter a new name and click Confirm. Okay, that's this questionnaire created. Now for the next one, which will be the attention check. Go back to your project screen, click Create New under Tasks and Questionnaires, and give it a title. For example, Attention Check. Add a new object to the first page, and we're going to be using the rating scale again, but this time with just two options, disagree and agree. Attention checks are useful in online research because sometimes you might find lazy participants or disingenuous participants who are just clicking through your study to get to the end. This might be because you're offering them some sort of payment, or perhaps they're collecting tokens for an assignment as they do at my university. We use attention checks to be able to stream out participants that are not being necessarily truthful or honest within their responses. You can also bake attention checks into pre-existing questionnaires, which I'm going to do now. I'm going to add a couple to the actively open-minded thinking scale questionnaire. Before adding attention checks to your study, you should always check with your supervisor and make sure that you have ethical approval to do so. Okay, so that's the end of the attention check stuff. Next, we're going to build our witness scenarios questionnaire. Back on the project screen, click Create New under Task and Questionnaires, give your new questionnaire a title such as Witness Scenarios, and then click Create. Click on page 1, click on Add Object, and add a text object. Give your object a name. This text object is going to be the home to the instructions to the participant as well as the actual scenario or vignette. Set the text in the text box by using Markdown, and this time I'm going to use this page as a template for all 4 scenarios, so I'm not actually going to add the scenario just yet. Underneath the scenario, we're going to ask our participants a series of questions. So to add the first question, click on Add Object, select the slider option and click Create. Change the question text and give your object a name. This particular question is about credibility, asking the participant to rate out of 100 how credible they find the witness. So the slider is a really good option for this as it's nice and visual. The second question is our confidence rating. So we're going to be using a rating scale object. So click Add Object, select Rating Scale, and then click Create. Set your question text and name your object. I'm going to give our participants 5 options from very low to very high. So I need to add a couple of response options and then change the text in the text boxes of the options. Our final question is the reliability of the witness. And for this, it's a simple yes or no response. So I chose to use the multiple choice question. However, you could use the rating scale as well if you wanted to. Click Add Object, select multiple choice, click Create, set the object name, set the question text, and change your responses to yes and no, and then delete the third option. Had I thought of it at the time, this would have been an excellent point to use the randomized order option on the multiple choice question. This could help control any order effects of our items. Okay, so because we have 4 witness scenarios or vignettes, we're going to jump back to the Pages screen and we're going to create 3 new pages. Then we're going to copy and paste the first page onto the other 3 new pages by clicking on the vertical ellipsis, the 3 dots stacked on top of each other, on the right hand side of page 1. Click Copy Page and then paste it to each of the new pages. Then I went back to each page and copied in the witness scenario text. While doing this, I hit upon a bit of a bug where I couldn't apply italics to the witness statement text using Markdown, so I ended up using the M or the EM HTML element to make the text italicized. I faffed about a bit here as well because I couldn't get it to look how I wanted. In the end, I just ended up making the text slightly larger and the witness scenarios italicized. Then I jumped over to page 2 by clicking on the page 2 tab at the top and then copy and pasted in the second witness statement and so on until I had pasted in all 4 statements across each page, making sure that I applied the same styling across each. Then I jumped back to the Pages screen and toggled the Randomized Page Order option. I did this to control for any order effects of the witness statements. All Randomized Page Order does is just shuffle which is the first, second, third, and fourth page the participant will see. So each participant will potentially see the witness scenarios in a different order. Finally, commit your witness scenario questionnaire as we've now added them all. Okay, on to our second to last questionnaire, the qualitative questions. Although Gorilla was originally designed for quantitative data collection, it can be used for qualitative purposes using the comment box question type. So from your project screen, click Create New under Tasks and Questionnaires, select Questionnaire, give it a name, and click Create. On page 1 of the new questionnaire, I'm going to add a text object to provide some instructions to the participants. I then add a comment box question, increase the number of rows to 15 to suggest that I want them to write more text, and then I jumped back to the Pages screen and created 2 more pages, one for each of my qualitative questions. And then I copied the first page onto pages 2 and 3, just as I did in the previous questionnaire. Now all I need to do is edit the question text on each comment box with the question that I want them to answer. I then made sure that I renamed each of the comment box questions to reflect which of the qualitative questions they were asking. I then jumped back to the Pages screen and toggled randomized page order. However, this time I wanted the first question to always be presented to the participant first, and the second and third question to be randomized. So to do this, I added an exception. I clicked on Add under Accept and selected page 1. The exception rule works by fixing a page in its given position within the questionnaire. So in the current example, what I wanted was the first question, question 1, which is found on page 1, to always be presented to the participant. So I set up an exception for page 1. Now that the qualitative questions are complete, I committed the questionnaire and added a description to make it clear what I've done on it. All that remains to be done now is to create the debrief questionnaire with a feedback page. But this time, we're not going to create a new one from scratch. Instead, I'm going to clone it from an existing project on my account. This works very much like importing a template, but relies on you having the questionnaire or task that you need already on your account. Okay, so here on page 1 is the debrief sheet. This is actually a template I've taken from a staff training project I created. So I'm going to pretend that this is actually a completed debrief sheet for our experiment, but we would just edit it exactly the same way as we started building our participant information sheet at the start. For this demonstration as well, I want to include a feedback page. Ordinarily, this is something I would steer away from in research because we don't necessarily want to provide our participants with certain information, for example, their scores from a certain questionnaire. However, we might need to do this in certain circumstances, so this is more a demonstration of the principle rather than something I would routinely do in research. So I've created a second page on the debrief questionnaire, and I've added a text component. I'm editing the text box to provide some information to the participants and styling it using Markdown and HTML. Now, in order to provide the participants with their score on the actively open-minded thinking scale, we're going to need to use a small piece of JavaScript. JavaScript is a common programming language used on the internet, but don't let that scare you if you're not familiar with how to program. In fact, in this example, I forgot how to do this myself, so I had to check the documentation, which I did by clicking on the I button on the right-hand side next to the text component. So if you want to pull in data from previous questionnaires, you will have needed to set up a scorer. What a scorer does when the participant finishes that particular questionnaire is create a variable in Gorilla's store that contains the value of that score, however you've set it up. This value is available within the experiment, which we're going to set up next, to be able to be pulled into any other questionnaire or task that we create. So to do this, we use a piece of syntax which starts with the $sign followed by a curly bracket, the word store, and a colon followed by the name of the scorer we created. In our example, the AOT total. Then finish the syntax with a closing curly bracket. Now, I realise that this can feel a little bit complicated or a bit superfluous or, a little bit intimidating perhaps, but it just takes time and practice, and it can be a particularly useful skill when developing more advanced research projects. Okay, so you're probably glad to know that that's the last questionnaire we need to make. All that remains now is to build the experiment. The word experiment can be a little bit misleading in Gorilla because people automatically assume that it's going to be some sort of cognitive task or something like that, but it's not. An experiment in Gorilla is basically a flowchart that we build for a participant to follow. So all we're going to do is add the questionnaires that we've created to the experiment in order that we want them to be presented to the participant. So from the project menu, click Create New underneath the experiment, give your experiment a decent name, and then you can start to add in your questionnaires that you've built. You can do this by clicking on the white plus sign in the little blue circles on the black line between the start and finish nodes. Then, as I'm doing on the screen now, you can start to add in your questionnaires. Each questionnaire is a node on the flowchart. The participant will start at the start and then progress through each node on the flowchart until they reach the finish node. It's worth mentioning here as well that it can be very easy to make a bit of a messy flowchart. And because I'm not a psychopath, I like to arrange things neatly on the screen so it's clear what the actual direction and flow of the study is. This is especially important if you have collaborators working on the project with you, or if you need someone to come and give you some help to figure out what might be going wrong. A messy experiment flowchart is a headache that nobody needs to have. And if you can't already tell, I have seen some absolute nightmares. So just please don't do them. Make them nice, make them neat, so that it's easy for somebody to be able to see what the hell's going on. Once you've finished building your flowchart and making it look nice, you can commit it or you can preview it. You don't need to have committed your experiment before you can preview it. Previewing your experiment is really useful because it not only gives you an idea of what your participant is going to do, it will also suggest how long it might take them and allow you to spot any errors. For example, forgetting the debrief sheet, as I have done in this demo. It will also let you test things that aren't possible to test in a questionnaire preview, like presenting the AOT score in your feedback page on your debrief questionnaire. If you preview this within the questionnaire, it has no data to report on the screen, so it just appears blank. But in an experiment preview where you can fill out the AOT questionnaire, the score will be presented on the feedback page once you've remembered to add it. So after completing the first preview, I went back and added in the debrief sheet, and then I realized that I hadn't presented the pages in the correct order, so I changed that too. Putting the feedback before the debrief because typically the debrief page is the last page you want participants to see. After I completed the edits to the debrief and feedback questionnaire, I went back to my experiment and updated the nodes within it. This is something you must remember to do if you edit a task or a questionnaire after you've set up your experiment. This might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but it's there to make sure that you have a chance to review the changes to your experiment before it goes live to any participants if you've already started data collection. Now that I've updated the nodes, all I need to do now is set up some branching to screen out participants who aren't engaging with the questionnaires properly. So if you think back to when we were creating the AOT questionnaire and also the attention check questionnaire, we created 4 overall attention checks. And we're going to use branching nodes within the experiment to check the values that participants have responded with on those questions and screen them out if they've made an incorrect response. Then, back in the experiment, add in a branching node. Branching nodes allow you to funnel participants down different routes in your experiment based on data that you've provided them, like scores from a scorer. I've labelled the branches fail or continue, and then set up the logic so that should a participant not have the correct response in the first AOT attention check, they will be passed to the fail line. However, if their response is what we expect, then they will continue on in the experiment, being passed from one branch node to the other until they've resolved each of those branching checks. I link the fail routes to a reject node that I added to the experiment, and then the continue node to each branch until I get to the 4th branch, which then continues on to the witness scenarios. Do a quick preview to check that it's all working, which it appears to be. And for some strange reason, the continue branch from the 4th node continues to disappear. until I committed the experiment. But once I committed it, it seemed to stay, which is exactly what we want anyway. All that remains for us to do now is to set up our recruitment. So click on the Recruitment tab at the top, and here you've got several options. The first of which is Change Recruitment Policy. Gorilla offers a wide range of recruitment policies designed for all of the different ways that we can recruit participants to research. The students that I work with typically use one of two policies, the first of which is the simple link. This is a good choice for advertising on social media or on websites or forums, that sort of thing. The second recruitment policy typically used by my students is the SONA Systems recruitment policy. However, note that if you select this, there are a set of instructions on the screen that you must follow in order to make sure that your study works with SONA. If you're not sure how to do this, or you've set it up incorrectly, talk to your supervisor or your psychology technician, who should be able to help you. Next up is changing your recruitment target. This is where you specify the number of participants that you want to recruit. Gorilla works on a free-to-build pay-per-respondent model, but typically students do not need to pay to use Gorilla. That's because most institutions have a subscription to Gorilla, and they can provide you with the tokens that you need in order to be able to recruit participants. To set your recruitment target, make sure that you're first added to your institution's subscription, and then click the Change Recruitment Target button at the bottom left. Enter in the number of participants that you want to recruit. I always add a couple of extra just to be on the safe side, and then choose your source of tokens. This could either be your own personal account if you own some tokens, or it could be from an institutional subscription. The next option that I want to introduce you to is the time limit. This is where you can specify the window of opportunity the participant has to complete participating in your study before it's closed. This is a bit of a double-edged sword. This is because setting a time limit seems like a quick fix for incomplete responses. But when someone closes the browser tab halfway through a study, Gorilla holds your recruitment token in limbo until that participation is completed, you manually reject that participation, or the timer runs out. But if a participant completes the main body of your study, but then closes their browser on the final debrief screen without clicking finish, Gorilla treats that participation as incomplete. So if you set an aggressive time limit, Gorilla will then automatically reject that timed out participation and discard their data, meaning you lose perfectly usable data. Instead of relying on time limits, I recommend checking your data periodically during collection and manually reject those participants who clearly abandoned the study halfway through, and include those that ended the study at the debrief page. The final options that we're going to discuss are requirements. In this menu, you can control various different things, such as the type of device that participants can use, whether they can use their phone, tablet, or a PC laptop. This is often an important consideration with online research, because if you're presenting specific information like a large image, this might not be the same size or visible to participants in the same way on a phone as it is on a laptop. You can also limit participants' browsers so they can only do your study on particular browsers. This can be very useful, as some older browsers or more rarefied browsers don't actually have all of the tools that are required by Gorilla in order to present the information correctly on the screen. You can also set location requirements, meaning that a participant can only respond to your study if they're in particular locations. I've never had to use this myself, so I can't speak to how accurate it is, but I would imagine that VPNs and things like that can cause you some issues if that is something that you're particularly concerned about. And finally, you can also set an internet speed requirement. This is again only really useful if you're presenting lots of information, like lots of large images or presenting lots of videos, that sort of thing, to your participants. And that is essentially how to build a seemingly simple but actually turned out to be reasonably complex questionnaire in Gorilla. And that's it. That's how you build a questionnaire in Gorilla and integrate some advanced tools like the automatic scorer and using branching nodes to reject participants that don't participate properly. So all that's left for me to do now is say that if you've got any questions or you've got any comments, please leave them down below in the comments section, and please do all the usual nonsense like and subscribe just to help the channel grow. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!